He'd say, Adam, son, in this life, you will have the opportunity to learn from the good and the bad. The only question is, are you smart enough to learn from both? Say it again. In this life, you will have the opportunity to learn from the good and the bad. The only question is, are you smart enough to learn from both? My dad would have turned 77 years old on May 28th of this year. He died 11 years ago this year. The feedback I've gotten from this podcast has been really interesting. And I'm super grateful, by the way, for the feedback, all of it, the good, the bad, everything in between. And it's mostly been, really good. The thing that kind of strikes me as interesting is how much feedback I get from people who never met my dad about the stories that I tell about my dad. And really reinforces to me just how lucky I was to have the father that I did growing up. He was a beauty. He's a great dad and a really just a good human being who was funny and brilliant and he was awesome. He was the best. And man, I miss him every day. Today on the Army of Great Men podcast, I'm going to tell you some stories about Derges, and I really hope you enjoy them. If you enjoy them half as much as I love telling these stories, then this is going to be a great episode. So let's go. Army of Great Men. Let's go. So this past February, my brother and sister and I took our families to Hawaii, which is where my parents spent their honeymoon. We did it to spread their ashes. It was a really, really cool thing. So first time we did a trip like this, all the kids were there. It was awesome. It was such a good time. And the way we spread their ashes is my brother-in-law, Mark, he had a buddy on Oahu who hooked us up with this catamaran. So we were out on the ocean all day, and we spread both their ashes together in the ocean. Everybody got to go take their turn and do that, and it really was just a magical, special day, and what a cool way to commemorate their lives. It was awesome. One of the things that happened that day, my nephew, Freddie, who is, he's such a good kid. He unfortunately, he was born just a little too late to get to know his grandpa, Al. And, of course, like, as you can imagine, we're all kind of sitting around telling stories about our parents, Al and Gayla, and Freddie being the really astute and intelligent kid that he is. We were sort of leaned up against this part of the catamaran, and he sort of snuggled up, and I put my arm around him, and he said, Uncle Adam, he said, I'm really sad that I didn't get to know Grandpa Al. He sounded like a pretty good guy. And I said, yeah. I said, he was. I said, but you know what? I said, you know him way better than you think you do. Because his impact on your mom and your Uncle Ray and me, it was huge. And so even though you never got to meet him directly, you're learning all the same stuff that he taught us, just indirectly. You're learning it through us. And I said, I tell you what, buddy, if there's ever a point where you wonder what Grandpa Al would say in terms of giving you advice or whatever, I said, chances are your mom knows, but if she doesn't know, you can pick up the phone, you can call me, I'll tell you every time. And I'll tell you exactly what he'd have told you. And it probably would have been bang on. And he got the biggest grin on his face. And he said, that sounds pretty great. And it's a really cool moment. It was really cool. So anyway, I'm going to tell some stories today about my dad And a few of the stories are stories that I've told on previous episodes. So, forgive me for the repetition, but I think this episode's going to flow a lot better if I just, sort of go through a bunch of these stories, even if you've heard them before. The good news about great stories is you can hear them more than once and they're still great. So, I'll do my best to sort of commemorate who, was definitely, he was my favorite person for a long time. And man, I miss him, but this is going to be fun. So my dad taught me how to live by 4 rules. And those 4 rules are, you are what you think about. You are who you hang around with. Everything happens for a reason. Good things happen to good people. And I've really tried to make sense out of life and to sort of let those rules govern most of the decisions that I've made. And I know my brother and sister, while they sort of, the rules that they live by might be just, a little bit slightly different, they're generally the same. But those are the 4 rules that I sort of live by. Not sort of, I do. They're my, that's how I point my moral compass. So I'm going to go through them one by one and give you a little bit of an idea of what they all mean. By the way, the last time I talked about this was at my dad's funeral. Last time I talked about it sort of in this format. And to give you an idea of what kind of impact my dad made on a number of people, he mentored a lot of people, like a lot. And these people, a lot of them showed up at his funeral, believe it or not, with a pen and paper in hand, because, and they told me after, there was probably, at least half a dozen, probably more like 10 to 12 people who brought a pen and paper to the funeral. And after, in the little greeting line, some of them came up to me and they said, yeah, I wanted to make sure I had a pen and paper handy because I was pretty sure that listening to his kids, they said, I was pretty sure I was going to learn, 1 or 2 more things, and I didn't want to waste it. And it was pretty neat to watch people taking notes at a funeral. But it's true. I mean, there were so many people who relied on him for mentorship and advice and guidance. And when he left, I think that, represented a pretty big hole and void for a lot of people. And so, if they could get one more nugget at his funeral, they were certainly going to do that. And, it was pretty cool. It was actually, he would have been really honored and excited about that. And actually, before I get into the 4 rules, I'm going to talk about how my dad looked at time. How he looked at time and how he looked at people, it's actually exactly the same way I do. Time is the one thing that we all have, the same amount. We all get the same number of minutes in a day, and, we don't all get the same amount of time on this earth. But time is precious, and Al looked at his time as a very precious thing. And so time actually, that was his currency. And if he viewed you worthy of his time, he'd do anything for you. Anything. And the people who knew him, they understood what it meant when he would talk about somebody and he'd go, I got time for that guy. Or I've got time for her. And it was the biggest compliment he could give you, was to say, I have time for you, which meant he was willing to take some of his most valuable currency and spend it on you. And those who were lucky enough to get that from him, and actually maybe a better way to put it was to earn it from him, right? Because if he was going to give you his time, he had to respect you, and you had to earn that. But if you earned his respect, he would do anything for you. And those people, and I know a lot of those people will end up listening to this episode, and they will, I hope they put in the comments about what it meant to have Al's time to reinforce it, because it really meant a lot. He's great at giving advice. He was, if he was in your corner, like if he was in your corner and you knew it, it just gave you so much courage to go and do anything, because if he gave you his time, that meant that, you knew that this man believed in you. And what was neat about the way he would believe in you is he wouldn't just believe in who you were. He would see all of your potential. That was one of his gifts, is he could see the greatness in people and he could pick it out and spot it. And he'd say, like, everybody has greatness somewhere. It's just, some people it's a little more hidden and buried. But everybody has some greatness in them somewhere. And so, once he would earn your respect, you'd look at him and he'd say, you can do this, you can do it. And you'd look at him, sort of cross-eyed, and be like, what the hell are you talking about, Al? Like, I can't do that. And he's, oh yeah, sure you can. You watch. You're going to do it. And it's going to happen way sooner than you think too. And he would pump you up and believe in you in a way that you almost had no choice but to believe in yourself, because you'd look at it and go, well, shit, this guy seems to know what he's talking about, and he sees this in me. And if he told me that about somebody else, I'd believe him. So maybe I need to start believing it, about me. And that's what he would do. He was in one form or another of sales management for, most of his adult life. And before he was in sales management, he was actually he was one of the head sales trainers for Xerox for quite a number of years, when Xerox was the unquestioned place that you would go if you wanted to learn how to sell. So their main sales office was in Leesburg, Virginia, United States. And so him and my mom, they moved down there because he got recruited to be one of their top sales trainers. So when you got hired by Xerox, you'd go down for, I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks for this, like, month-long, very intensive crash course on how to sell. And so he was literally one of the top sales trainers on planet Earth. And that's not hyperbole. He was incredible at it. He's really, really, really good at teaching people how to sell, and then, really good at managing them later as well. So he had all these people that, people who didn't think they'd ever be able to sell anything. And he would not only teach them, but teach them how to be great salesmen, and then give them all this confidence along the way. So, you can imagine why people loved him, right? I mean, he would see things in you that, you didn't even know were there, and then coach you to kind of bring them out and help sort of mold you and form you into becoming a better person. And, yeah, he was amazing at it. He really was. And it's part of why so many people just loved him the way they did. So anyway, back to the 4 rules. Sorry, I had to do a little aside there. So rule number 1, you are what you think about. My dad sort of did things that are talked about, like with The Secret. He was talking about that shit long before anybody had ever heard of The Secret or any of those things. He was all over it. Focusing your mind on the right things and things will follow. He was really good at it. And it's funny, he was better at teaching other people how to do this stuff than he was himself. And I'll get into that later. But he was really good at teaching other people how to use their brain to manifest things, and to really choose laser focus when you need laser focus on the outcome that you want. So he was pretty good at it himself. He was better at teaching others. But you are what you think about. One of the things that he would always say when I was a kid, he would say, "Oh, are we ever lucky? God, are we ever lucky? Can you believe how lucky we are?" We'd be playing catch in the yard or something, or going to Butler's for fish and chips in Regina Beach or whatever. Like, it didn't matter what it was. Things that, a lot of people might take for granted. But he would always make sure to pause. And this was his form of gratitude, is he would look at whoever was with him at the time, and he'd go, "Can you believe how lucky we are? Can you believe we get to do this? God, are we ever lucky? Jeez, this is good. What a day. Can you believe we get to do this again?" And I do the same thing with my kids. I do it all the time, right? Like right now, the The Edmonton Oilers are in the third round of the playoffs, and I've been watching these games with mostly with my boys, but my daughter sometimes too. When she's here, she's been going to a bunch of the watch parties to go watch, but when she's home, we watch together. And every time, at some point, I say, boys, kids, can you believe how lucky we are? We get to do this again. Oh my goodness, this is the best. And it reinforces to them that, we are lucky, right? Because later on, you're going to look back on this, and later on, it's not that far away when, the kids move out and you don't get to see each other as much. You don't get to do these things as much. And so, we are insanely lucky that we get to do this, that we get this time together, and we have these, we get to build these memories together. My dad, whenever there was something good like that, he would always say that. He would say, boy, are we ever lucky. And we felt lucky because of it. And as a result, our focus on what was happening was greater. We didn't want to waste it. We didn't want to be, distracted by something else. We wanted to be present because we knew that it mattered and it was special, and time is fleeting. So, to be able to spend that time together, it was awesome. And so he always did that. He always made us feel really, really lucky about the littlest things, but they were big, right? They weren't little. There's nothing little about getting to spend quality time with your dad. And I think a lot of people miss that. And when your dad's gone, you sure miss it. I'll tell you. That was one of the things that he would talk about was, in terms of you are what you think about, was focusing on the gratitude, right? Focus on the gratitude, focus on the luck, focus on just the abundance of it all. That was a big thing. He would also choose his focus, particularly when it was needed. One of the things that God gave all of us is free will, right? He used to say, no matter what happens, you have a choice in how you're going to deal with it, right? And sometimes those choices are harder to make than others, right? They really are. I love the golf analogy of play it as it lies, right? So for you golfers out there, you've heard that expression before, play it as it lies. Play it as it lies means, if your ball's if you have a bad lie, if your ball's in the trees or wherever, you hit it where it is, right? You don't get to kick it. You don't get to put it on a tee. You don't get to fluff up your lie. You play it where it sits. And there have been some really interesting experiments with golf over the years where people beat themselves up badly for hitting bad shots, right? So there were these experiments that they would do where they'd watch how people would react recovering from their own bad shots versus watching how they'd react if you just put their ball in a bad spot, right? So so imagine this: you're playing around a golf and you hit your tee shot in the trees, and you're pissed off and you're mad at yourself, and because of that, you compound the problem because you're putting blame on yourself, and you compound the problem, and you take one bad shot and then you compound it by having a poor decision to follow, and then you make a poor decision, and instead of making a bogey, you make a double or a triple or something worse because you make bad decisions because you're mad at yourself. And then they would take those same golfers, and rather than making them play their shot from the trees, they would just put a ball in the trees and say, okay, imagine your drive's here. What are you going to do? Well, then you take away that anger and the blame and all the negative self-talk. And what would happen is these golfers would make way better decisions because they weren't beating themselves up. That was one of the things that Al was really, really great at, was the whole concept of play it as it lies. Don't beat yourself up for how you got there. Just accept where you are right now. Don't blame other people for how they got there, right? Here's where I am. Here's my circumstance. Accept it as quickly as possible, because the sooner you accept it, the sooner you can move on to a better decision and hopefully make the problem as small as possible. So one of the things that he would do when he worked for Xerox in a sales role, this wasn't the management role, but as a sales role, every year what would happen was once a year they would roll out a new compensation structure. And the compensation structure would always be sort of set up like, you're probably going to make less money if you only do what you did last year, but if you can find a way to improve, then you'll actually make more than you did previously. But it's going to require, a little bit of work. And the other thing that Xerox had is they had all these incentive trips and all these different rewards that you could get. And my dad was a competitive guy, so he wanted to win, right? Like he wanted to come out ahead on those. And so every year, what would happen is they'd roll out the new compensation plan. And for the first month, everybody else would be bitching and complaining about the new compensation plan. And they wouldn't sell a damn thing because they'd be too busy feeling sorry for themselves and bitching and moaning and sitting on their hands. Well, that was my dad's favorite month of the year because he would forget about the old compensation. The old compensation was gone. That didn't exist anymore. And he would look at the new compensation plan and he would look at it and go, okay, well, how do I make the most of this? What do I do to do that? And so he'd get a full month's head start on everybody else. While everybody else was complaining, he's off to the races and gone. And like there was just no room for a pity party in his world. It just didn't exist. My favorite story about my dad with Play It As It Lies is ironically the beginning of what killed him. So he had, and by the way, I talked about this on episode 1 of this podcast, but I'm going to tell it again because it's just such a great story. So this was, I want to say like 2008, December 2008, Christmas of 2008, I think. And my dad, a couple of years before the year before that, he had prostate cancer. And of course, like they load you up with all these hormones and all these different things. And while he's going through that, it was kind of towards the end of that treatment, this funny lump just showed up on the back of his leg in his hamstring on his right leg. So he goes to his doctor, who was a friend of the family, somebody who, he could go to. And so this friend of the family sort of looked at this and said, you know what, Al, I think it's just like a lump of scar tissue that came loose for some reason, because he had torn that hamstring a number of years earlier. And so he said, I don't think this is anything. Let's just cut it out so you can go enjoy Christmas. So they cut it out, and then the doctor looks at it and he's like, geez, maybe we'll biopsy this just to be safe. So then they drove to my place here in Edmonton, and my brother's family and my sister's family, my mom and dad, we were all here together, which was awesome. And we get the news, we get the call. It was the 23rd or 24th, but like right before Christmas, we get the call. The call was, hey, Al, we biopsied that thing and it was cancer, and I'm sorry. And my mom already knew what that meant. She already knew that because they didn't take it out properly and because they didn't biopsy it first before cutting it out, that it was almost certainly going to come back. Because you can imagine, right? It was this perfectly contained ball of cancer. And then my understanding, I'm certainly not an expert in this, but my understanding is that there are all these little tendrils that kind of were attached to it. And if they would have biopsied it and found out it was cancer, they would have cut a much wider swath around it, and they would have radiated and they would have killed all those tendrils. But because they didn't do that, they just kind of took the lump out. Those tendrils go away and then they come back like it's inevitable. They're going to come back. A lot of cancers of the flesh are really aggressive in nature. And that's why you got to check your moles and stuff, right? Because they can spread pretty quick. So anyway, we get this news and we're all kind of in shock. And my dad, he always go like this. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see, he'd lick his fingers and like that, his lips. And he said, just a minute. That's a minute. He said, guys, I need a minute. So he goes downstairs and we gave him some time, and we all sort of sat around with my mom and just started processing it, right? And talking to her. And of course, she's already, trying to do her research to try to figure out, how we're going to cure this or whatever. And I go downstairs. I gave him maybe 15, 20 minutes, whatever it was. And I go downstairs and he's got his computer, his laptop up on my bar. And he goes, Adamson, come here. You got to see this. What the? Okay. So I go over there and he's got this website loaded. And on the website are all these prosthetic legs. And he goes, Adamson, we got lucky. We got lucky on this one. He goes, look how this leg operates. He goes, look how it moves. He goes, I'll be able to golf with this leg, no problem. Won't be an issue. And he goes, do you know why we got lucky? And I like, no, Dad, why did we get lucky here? And he goes, because it was my right leg. He goes, look how the other legs move. If it was my left one, he goes, if it was my left one, I wouldn't be able to golf. He goes, I'd be fucked. I'll never forget it. He goes, if it was my left one, I'd be fucked. He said, but Adamson, it's my right leg. We're great. I'll be able to golf with this, no problem. And he did. He did. I'll post a video on Instagram of his golf swing when he was in his prime in 1989, and then I'll show you his golf swing that he had with his prosthetic leg. He had a beautiful, beautiful swing, classic golf swing. So he played with that leg, not a lot, but he could still hit it. But the moral of that story is, I hope it's pretty clear. And, it's not that you don't grieve things. It's not that you don't take the time to feel them. You certainly can do that. But the time you waste when you wallow around feeling sorry for yourself, you're just falling behind, right? Sometimes you get a shitty situation, you're in a shitty spot, you hit your ball in the trees, and you can sit there and blame other people or blame yourself or whatever. Or you can accept where you lie. You can accept where you sit and make the best decision for it at that time, like right then. And he was just a master at it. He was a master at it. Now, you are what you think about. There was some downside to this too, because sometimes the people that, really trusted him, he could sort of trick them into thinking that things were maybe a little better than they were. And my favorite story about this, like my mom had the best bullshit detector of anybody I've ever met. In most ways, like, don't get me wrong, like she get fooled by some things, but like a lot of the stuff happening in the world, she saw it coming 100 miles away, pretty strong bullshit detector. But my dad could trick her whenever he needed to. And my favorite story about that, he got this putter. So, my mom's getting into golf, and at this time they had, they didn't have two nickels to rub together, but he somehow stumbled into finding this putter. I'm guessing he either won it at a golf tournament or found it at a garage sale or a dumpster or in a ditch somewhere. I don't know where he found this putter. I swear you guys, this is the worst putter that's ever been made. And he convinced her that, this thing was blessed by Bobby Jones, Jesus, and Jack Nicklaus all on the same day. Like he had her convinced that this is the greatest putter ever made. And I'm not kidding you guys. Like there's nobody on earth could use this putter and putt well. It is the biggest piece of shit you've ever seen. I don't know how you could make a putter worse than this one. Anyway, so I'm imagining how this story went. He comes home and he's like, Kayla, you're not going to believe this, but I got you this putter. You sitting down? You ready? Yeah. All right. Kayla, it's a Ray Cook. What's a Ray Cook? What's a Ray Cook? Huh. Let me show you. So he convinces her that this Ray Cook putter is the greatest thing ever made. Because, and in fairness, like he just wanted her to feel good about her putter, right? Like he wanted her to feel like, she was great. And the truth is my mom was a shitty putter anyway. You could have given her a stick with a brick tied to the end of it. It wouldn't have mattered. So you take somebody who's already a shitty putter and then you give them the world's worst piece of equipment and, you can imagine. But But he wanted her to feel good about it, right? He did. And so, but he did too good a job, because then later when they had some money, he couldn't get her to get rid of this piece of shit. And so, like, my brother and I remember this. It's the classic line. We didn't know just how cemented she was, to this putter, like how committed she was to using it. And Ray one day, he says, Mom, maybe we should get you a new putter for Mother's Day or something. And she's, what? What are you talking about? This is a Ray Cook. Oh, right. It's a Ray Cook. And we'd laugh and laugh. We didn't laugh behind my mom's back very much, but we giggled about the old Ray Cook on more than a few occasions. So anyway, when my dad was dying, he died in 2013. So leading up to him dying, he didn't have a lot of regrets in life, but I knew that one of those regrets was convincing my mom that this piece of shit putter was the way to go. So I'm in Golf Town with one of my kids, and I look, and TaylorMade had this putter, and it said TaylorMade something, and then it said RC behind it. And the light goes on. I'm like, it's a Ray Cook RC. We're going to trick my mom again. So I buy this putter. Mother's Day was coming up, and I tell my dad. My mom was out running errands. I was like, hey, Dad, you got to go. You got to go with this story. We're going to tell her that TaylorMade hired Ray Cook to design their putters so she can have a new Ray Cook. And he's just, grinning ear to ear. He's like, this is great. So she comes home. I'm in the kitchen, and my dad's, sitting having a smoke somewhere, waiting to die. And I said, hey, Al, did you hear the news about TaylorMade and Ray Cook? And he goes, no, what's that all about? And I said, well, TaylorMade hired Ray Cook to design their putters, and I guess they're pretty good. And he goes, no, that's a big deal. He said, holy shit. It's like, there's going to be a lot of players using those on tour here right away. And I said, oh, yeah, for sure. And of course, did it within earshot of my mom, and she sort of perks up. And then so for Mother's Day, we gave her this new TaylorMade putter that she thought was a Ray Cook. And that was the only way to sort of there's no way a golfer of Gayla Derges' caliber that would even consider using a piece of equipment that wasn't a Ray Cook. Like, what are you, nuts? No chance. So, we got her this putter that she thought was a Ray Cook. Didn't improve her putting. And then it was funny. I wanted to tell this story at her funeral just last year. And so I'm rooting around. I'm trying to find, where the hell is this Ray Cook? Do you know where we found it? We found it in her golf bag. And you might think, well, of course you found it in her golf bag. No. She took the new putter out, this putter that was actually good. It's off in the closet, and she put her old shitty Ray Cook back in the bag. I don't even think she tried it. She just, so there was some downside into the you are what you think about, because he could convince you that things were maybe a little better than they actually were at some time. And so that was one of my favorite stories about that. But honestly, he would get you to believe in yourself in the most powerful ways, in ways that, you'd use that belief to go and accomplish things. And yeah, man, it was such a gift when he believed in you. And the people, I'm going to send this episode to a bunch of the people who looked up to my dad, and I know they're going to get a lot of pleasure out of it, because it's true. It's really true. When he believed in you, there was just nothing like it. It was the best. He could convince you to fly to the moon with your own, just by flapping your own arms. It was, he was a dreamer. And when he dreamed on your behalf, you kind of had no choice but to believe it. It was really powerful. One of the other stories, and I wish I had permission to tell you more about who this person was, because he's kind of a notable figure in Regina. But when my dad, he worked for this company called Supreme Basics, and he was a he was in a management role for a number of years there. And, he would get to know everybody. He got to know everybody in the warehouse, and he knew who their kids were and what they did. And he knew the people who drove delivery trucks and the salespeople and the receptionist and everybody. So every day he'd pour himself a coffee and he'd go do a lap and he'd say hi to everybody in the building, and he got to know them. And he almost always ate lunch in the lunchroom. He would very rarely go out because he wanted to spend time with the staff. And then got to the point where he'd pick a day each week, Thursday or Friday or whatever it was, and he'd bring in like pulled pork in a slow cooker and just send an email out saying, "Hey, got pulled pork in the lunchroom. Anybody wants some? Come help yourself." And so he just wanted to spend time with them and get to know them, so that A, they knew that he cared, because he really did care. But B, if he's there to sort of mentor and guide these people, he's got to know what's going on with them, right? So that's what he would do. He wanted to know, and he'd sit down with lunch with everybody and just get to know them and spend that time. It was great. Well, one of the guys, he was one of the truck drivers, and he's making $30,000 a year. And my dad got to know him to the point where he said, "Hey, look," he said, "I've been training salespeople my whole life, like my whole adult life." He's like, "I know what salespeople look like. You could do this." He's like, "I promise you could do this." And the guy says, "Well, Al, that's great, but like, I can't take the risk, right? Like, if I sell, that would be a commission job. It's like, I got, a kid to feed, got another one on the way. I need my $30,000 base. And like, I'm sorry, thanks for believing in me, but I just can't. I can't take the risk." And my dad said, "Okay, well, I tell you what. He goes, I'll make you a deal." He goes, "I will guarantee your $30,000 salary. I'll guarantee you'll still make that. I also promise you that at any point, if ever, no questions asked, if ever you say, 'You know what, Al, sales isn't for me, I want to go back to driving the truck,' I'll give you your old job back in a heartbeat." Like that, no questions asked. He said, "But if you do this and you do what I tell you and you follow the guidance and advice that I'm going to give you, if you do that, you're going to make $100,000 in your first year. I promise." And the guy looks at him like, he's like, "What? What are you talking about? Like, what? There's no way I'm going to make that." My dad said, "I'm telling you, you are. You will do that in your first year. I promise you." And so he convinced him to do it. And he did it. He made $100,000 in his first year. Yeah. I wish I could tell you who this guy was, because he's kind of an oddly notable figure in Saskatchewan. But I don't have permission, so I won't. But he was one of the people taking notes at the funeral, and gave me a big hug, and gave my brother a big hug, my sister, and just said, like, "You guys have no idea what your dad meant to me." And there was just so many people like that, just so many people that he did that. And so, you are what you think about. You can use that for goal setting. You can use that for the way you choose your actions. You can use that for how you choose to play it as it lies, anything. But the moral of the story is, until you get your mind focused on the right thing, you're never going to go there. Ever. It's just not possible. You're going to go where your mind is focused. Only every time. And so that's why choosing your focus is just so critical. In other words, you are what you think about. That was rule number 1. Rule number 2, you are who you hang around with. What does that mean? It's pretty simple. You hang around with great people, you're probably going to do great things. It's going to rub off on you. If you hang around with a bunch of turkeys, you're probably going to be a turkey. Simple as that. So remember, I said his currency was time, right? So you are what you hang around. You are who you hang around with. That was a big part of it, right? He would spend his time with people he loved, and only people he loved. And if you were lucky enough to be loved by my dad, you could move mountains. You could do anything. Plus, he was fun, right? Like, it wasn't just about mentoring people. It was about getting out on the golf course and hanging out and spending time playing cards at the lake or whatever. Like, you just wanted to be around him. He just had this energy that was just so contagious. And fucking so fun. And we would laugh and laugh. And when he'd laugh, when he got going, he'd go, "Ooh, ooh." and then he couldn't stop. He'd hoot like an owl. And then we'd laugh and laugh more and more. So, you are who you hang around with. It's not just about, learning and mentoring and things like that, although that was a big part of what made him, so loved by so many people. But it was also just be with people who fill your tank, be with people who fill you up with love and kindness and happiness, joy. And, if you hang around with a bunch of people that are just miserable all the time, you're going to be miserable all the time. Everybody has this story at some point in their life. Somebody who's just really toxic and miserable and whatever. When that person is no longer in your life, the relief you feel from an energetic perspective, it's incredible, right? To be able to just shed that dead weight, that anchor. What a gift. And your energy will change so quickly when that happens. And so that's why he wouldn't waste his time with people who, suck his energy dry, right? No chance. I'm not going to give him that. No way. No chance. No chance. And so that's what he did. So rule number 2, you are who you hang around with. It's a big one, right? It really is. And, I've shed some people in my life, friends and coworkers and whatever. And once I can tell you that once I no longer view somebody worthy of my time, they don't get it. Like none. And it doesn't mean I'm going to go fight with them and stuff like that. That's when I mean none of my time, it means they don't get anything from me anymore. No anger, no love, no aggression, no patience, just gone. They're gone. And that's how my dad operated as well. It wasn't about like revenge or anything. It was just like, okay, you've demonstrated to me that you are no longer worthy of my time. You get none of it. Good luck. Right. That's how I operate as well. Once somebody has wasted that, they don't get a thing. And I think, honestly, that's an important trait. And I think that it's actually something that I think more people should employ in their life. When somebody else knows that they can jerk you around and waste your time, or worse yet, betray you, or, do things behind your back, or deliberately try to fuck you up or screw you over, like any of those things. When they tell you that, cut them out. Do it. End it. Just, you're done. Why? And so you might ask yourself, why do I say people deserve second chances? Well, yeah, like for some things. I'm not saying like every time somebody does anything, you cut them out of your life. But when someone demonstrates that, they're not in your corner, if you just keep letting them do that to you, it tells everybody else around you that you're okay with being treated like that. And then other people are going to treat you like that. They will. But if you just say, nope, you're done. We are done. Have a good life. It holds other people accountable too, because they know, ooh, you cross them in this way, you don't get them in your life anymore. And if you're the kind of person that people want in their life, that's a meaningful consequence, right? So it holds people accountable to their actions and how they treat you and how they treat people you care about. You screw me over, you screw over one of my friends, somebody in my family, whatever, and it's deliberate and you're doing this on purpose, you're dead to me. Some people might view that as harsh. I just view it as having really, really clearly defined boundaries and frankly, knowing what I'm worth. And my dad was very aware of that. The other thing that he taught me was good things happen to good people. And I think this was sort of his way of teaching me about karma, right? Be a good person. Don't be an asshole. Be a good person. Don't be an asshole. Like that's really what it comes down to. Be a good person. I mentioned earlier that my dad was not a religious person by any means, but he would talk about, looking your maker in the eye one day. And, when you get that opportunity, when we're done with this life, I assume we're going to have to answer to the life that we led. Could you look at God and say, yeah, pretty proud of the way I lived? Or would it be filled with nothing but regret and shame? Nobody's perfect, and I'm not saying that my dad was perfect or I'm perfect by no means am I suggesting either of those things. That would be ludicrous. But if you can look back and say, yeah, I think the world was a better place because I was in it. I think I did way more good than bad. I think the life I led made other people's lives better. I think I was a kind person. I think I was an honest person. You do that, you generally get rewarded. And it's not to say that, bad things don't happen to good people. They do. But that's when you go back to rule number one. What you think about. Okay, something shitty happened to you. What do we do about it? Right? And this would be one of the other kind of spin-off lessons. And I've talked about this a lot. Sometimes when something bad happens to you, it's actually a gift. It's God or the universe or whatever pushing you out of something that you think you wanted and into something that God knows you want. Right? And sometimes we don't have either the courage or the vision to see those things. So, even when tough things happen, even when bad things happen, there's almost always good in it, particularly if you're a good person, and particularly if you're willing to do the work, and particularly if you're allowed to accept your circumstance as quickly as possible, play it as it lies, and make the best decisions moving forward. You do that, you can turn your speed bumps into wonderful launch pads to bigger and better things. But yeah, good things happen to good people. I mean, I just think he thought that was a universal truth, and for most things, and I would tend to agree with him. And then the last one, sort of, that sort of dovetails into the last rule, which is everything happens for a reason. If you combine those four things, you are what you think about, you are who you hang around with, good things happen to good people, and everything happens for a reason. If you combine those four rules, you can make sense out of almost anything. There are a few things that, and I don't even want to talk about some of the things that are so bad that, you can't apply those four rules to. But most of the stuff you're going to encounter in life, most of the hurdles you're going to encounter in life, you can make a lot of sense of them by looking at those four rules. It certainly helped me. It certainly helped him too. One of the other lessons, and this didn't come from those four rules, but he said this to me. Oh man, I wouldn't even want to guess how many times he said this to me. He'd say, Adam, son, in this life, you will have the opportunity to learn from the good and the bad. The only question is, are you smart enough to learn from both? Say it again. In this life, you will have the opportunity to learn from the good and the bad. The only question is, are you smart enough to learn from both? You can apply that to almost every lesson that you have in this life. Most of the best lessons you have aren't from wins. They're from losses. You learn way more from losses than wins if you're smart enough, right? If you're aware enough and you're not feeling sorry for yourself while it happens. That's where most of the best lessons come. You can also apply it to people, right? No matter who raised you, I don't care who they are. You could have the best parents in the world, the worst parents in the world, or anything in between. But you're going to pick up habits and you're going to learn some things from your parents that you definitely want to emulate. And there's also going to be things that you're going to say, oh, there's no way I'm going to do that. I'm going to do it differently. My dad's parents his dad in particular was quite hard on him. He's a decent man. I think he was probably, in that era, I mean, you're really hard on your boys. And, I think, there were more than a few occasions where, I think he was harder on my dad at a young age than maybe he should have been. And, my dad told me a story once. My dad was maybe 12 or 13 years old at the time. And he told me the story about when he decided that he was going to be a better dad than his. I was about that age. And I was getting in shit for a bunch of stuff. And I think my dad was starting to, start to get, not to the level that his dad did with him, but he's starting to get, pretty mad overly mad at some of the things that I was doing. And then one day he caught himself. I'll never forget it. Like I was like maybe 11 years old, whatever it was. And we were sitting on the deck, Craven, Saskatchewan. And he said, Adam, son, he said, when I was your age, my dad was pretty hard on me. And I made a promise to myself that I would never treat my kids the way he treated me. And he said, and you know what? I feel like I've been getting close on that with you. He said, I'm sorry. He said, I broke my promise to myself and to you. And he goes, it changes right now. Imagine making that promise to yourself at such a young age and then remembering it later. What a gift. What a gift. So, that was his example of learning from the bad, right? I'm not going to repeat this pattern. I'm not going to do it. So I learned a lot of great things from my dad. The one thing in terms of learning from the bad that, I definitely don't want to copy with him. So, and this sort of falls in line with what you think about. So on his first date with my mom, their first date, he told her that he had no intention of living one day past 65. He's like, growing old does not appeal to me. Like, I do not want to live past 65. He died, a month after turning 66. Like, he almost did it. He almost got it done. He was trying. He didn't take very good care of himself. He definitely drank too much. He smoked his whole life. Actually, it's kind of a funny story. So he started smoking when he was 11 years old, and his grandpa caught him smoking. This is actually a really funny story. His grandpa caught him smoking. He's smoking De Maurier cigarettes. His grandpa says, "Hey, Al, what the hell are you doing there? What are you smoking?" And my dad's like, "Oh shit, sorry. Yeah, no, he thought he was in trouble for smoking." And his grandpa says, "Hey, look." He's like, "You don't smoke those De Mauriers." He said, "Those ones will kill you." He goes, "Here, Rothmans. You're going to smoke Rothmans." He goes, "Rothmans, it's owned by the Jews." He said, "They're way smarter than the other guys. They're not going to put the stuff in their cigarettes that are going to kill you." It's like, "You smoke Rothmans, you'll be fine." So from the time he was 11 years old till the day he died, he smoked 2 packs of Rothmans a day. And of course, like when he was older, he knew that, that was not true. But grandpa said it. That's what he did. As a kid, he thought he was going to be fine because his grandpa said, Rothmans will be fine. They're not going to kill you. But he really didn't look after himself very well. Smoked, drank, not the best diet. But the other thing is all of that belief that my dad had in other people, he didn't have it in himself. He knew that everybody loved him, and he knew that he was great at getting the best out of people, but he always sold himself short, and he would always put himself last in every situation, looked after everybody else before himself, and he wouldn't do the work on himself. He had some stuff to work on, right? Maybe save that for another episode, but he had personal stuff that he had to work on, and he didn't do it. He didn't do it. He would just shy away from it. And I think that manifested in the form of cancer, right? Just a whole bunch of things that he just wouldn't do, wouldn't work on himself. And it was a real shame because, maybe if he did, he'd still be here. But maybe that was his path, right? I certainly wouldn't have traded a longer period of time with a different dad, so yeah, we lost him too soon, but the time we had, what a gift. Like, we are luck. Now, sorry, that was one of the other things I meant to say earlier. At some point, he stopped saying we are lucky, and then he started saying we are luck. And he didn't want to describe us as being lucky as an adjective. He wanted to say we are luck as a noun, as in we are luck, we are gratitude, we are love, we are all of it right here. We are luck. And he wouldn't just say that when things were going well. He would say that during the hardest times. And again, this was played as it lies. So when we were in Arizona when he found out that the cancer had spread from his leg to his lungs, because they ended up taking his leg, and like he had the prosthetic, and then eventually it spread to his lungs, and that's ultimately what killed him. We were in Arizona, and the day he found out that it had spread to his lungs, and of course, like, he knew what that meant, and he went out on the deck where the place we were staying with my mom, and there's a beautiful sunset, and he sat there, stood behind my mom, and he held her, and they both had tears rolling down their face, and he said, "We are luck. We are luck." And in that moment, Play to the lies, he chose to focus on that exact moment and make the most of it. He was there with his soulmate, looking at a beautiful sunset. He had his arms wrapped around her. He's with his family. Lived an awesome life. So many friends. So many great people in his life. He said, "We are luck." What a gift. And he was right. He was right. He was luck. What a guy. I wish you could have met him. And I hope that me telling you these stories sort of brings him, lets you know, why so many people loved him. And hopefully you can learn from some of these stories. And I could tell stories about my dad all day. I'm actually going to tell one more before we're done here. And as a father, I think about this story a lot, right? As a dad, there's this balance that we all have, right? And the balance is how much effort do we put into protecting our kids from the world, and how big of a leash do we give them, or how much rope do we give them to go and make their own mistakes and get hurt and skin their knees and get in trouble and, do all that stuff, because that's what helped you grow, right? Like, your dad's not going to be there forever to protect you from everything. You've got to get out there and do some shit, experience some things. And now, I think it's even harder for kids with, with all the bullying and all like online bullying. And not that there weren't bullies in my age, and there certainly were. I'm going to tell you a story about one in a second, but I think that balance is maybe harder than ever before, because we, as a society now, we always want to wrap our kids in bubble wrap and protect them from everything. And, God forbid they lose or get their feelings hurt, right? And if you don't let them do that, then they never grow, and they enter the world and they're shell shocked when they actually face adversity. So my dad was the master at this, at letting us fail and making sure that we understood that failure was okay. So my brother, sister, and I, none of us have an ounce of fear of failure. Not an ounce. It never concerns us, because failure in itself was a win when we grew up, right? We knew inherently that if we fucked up, he'd be there for us. He'd protect us. He'd dust us off, pick us up, tell us he loved us, and send us back out in the world. And that was a really wonderful gift growing up, to have no fear of failure, because, then we'd talk about the lesson in the failure. If it was something that we tried and we failed, he'd say, "Well, isn't that lucky that we know that way won't work now? Do you want to try it again the same way, or should we try it a different way?" Well, when you put it that way, let's try it a different way. But there was also a moment where I was in the right and I was getting picked on, and he stood up for me in a pretty meaningful way. So this was, I think I was in grade 11, maybe grade 10. Yeah, I must somewhere in there. I think it was grade 10. And I was a scrawny little shit in high school. I was so little. Like, on the last day of grade, I'm 6'1" now. On my last day of grade 11, I was 5'1" and like 105 pounds. Like, I was this tiny little rat. and cocky as hell. Bad combo. So anyway, there's this kid who was picking on me, and he kept stealing my lunch. And so I'd have my bag under my desk, and every once in a while, like, he'd just reach in my bag and grab my lunch and start eating it. And like, the kid outweighed me by 70 pounds. Like, there's nothing I was gonna be able to do. And so I talked to my dad. I'm like, what do I do about this? And he's like, Adam, you got to stand up for yourself. Like, figure it out. Okay. So I'm in social studies class, and I am going to use names because these teachers deserve to be called out. I don't even know if they're alive anymore, but fuck them. Anyway, Mr. Langford. Mr. Langford, and actually Langford was an okay guy, but he screwed this part up. So this kid steals my sandwich, and I look back and he's eating my sandwich, and I'm like, I stood up and I went, fuck off, like right in the middle of the social studies class. And so Langford's like, oh, okay, principal's office, you're out of here. So head down to the principal's office, and the principal was out of town, so it's the vice principal, old Rod Langford, who had to, made sure he swung the big stick when he got to be vice principal for a day, or filling in for the principal. So anyway, he's like, why are you here? And I tell him. He's like, okay, well, let's get your dad on the phone. So speakerphone calls my dad at work, and my dad answers, hey, what's going on? And Al, Rod Reinhardt here. We got to hear this story about your son, and I want you to hear from him. It's okay. So, hey, Dad. Yeah. Okay. You know that kid that was stealing my lunch and bullying me? Yeah. Well, I stood up in the middle of class. I told him to fuck off, and now I'm getting suspended for 2 days. My dad goes, really? And I said, yep. And he goes, do you want to go golfing? And I said, like, puffed my chest out. I said, yep. So Reinhardt's scrambling, like, what the hell? What's going on? So, my dad worked in Regina, and we're out in Lumsden, which is about, 20 minutes away. So he pulls up to the front of the school, and I'm proud as punch. Like, I'm waiting on the lawn. I'm so excited. My dad stood up for me. So I get in the front seat, and I roll the window down, and Reinhardt standing there, and I can hear his windows rolled down. And he's like, Al, hey, can we talk for a second? Yeah. And he goes, hey, Al, I just need to know. It's like, what exactly are we teaching your son here? My dad looked him right in the eye, and he said, Rod, I'm teaching my son a very clear lesson. I'm teaching him that when people like you don't have his back, I do. Have a nice day. We're going golfing. Gets in the car. He looks over at me and he goes, I got you, bud. Fuck those guys. Let's go golfing. And he took the day off work, and he took the next day off work, and we went and played golf on school days. I came back, and it was a good day to come back to school. I was proud as punch. The funny thing is, I think, and I don't have confirmation on this, but I'm pretty sure that was the last out-of-school suspension in Lumsden High School history. After that, they switched it to in-school suspensions. So if you got suspended for something, you'd have to go to school and basically sit in detention all day. So I was the last one. So sorry to everybody else that my dad ruined it for you. But what a great lesson. And I can tell you that as a dad, my kids are very well aware that I've got them. They all know that under no circumstance will there ever be anything that they can't come to me with. And you talk about your role as a dad, as a protector, that's top of the list, right? That is absolutely top of the list. My kids know. And you know what? If you want to keep people from screwing with your kids, let the world know that their dad's got their back, right? It's one of the, not to get too far off topic, but this is proven. They've interviewed, child predators and things like that. And the number one deterrent for a child predator is that the dad is there to protect them. And I can tell you, I'm really happy to put this on here. If anybody ever did something to my kids like that, you wouldn't find their body. I tell everybody that threat alone is enough to keep most people away. They'd never find their body. But in terms of just standing up for my kids and just being there and knowing that I got them, especially when they're going through stuff, it matters. And I make a point of telling my kids, like, I get one-on-one time with my kids just about every day. And anytime I feel like they need to hear it, I let them know, hey, I got you. You know that, right? Yeah. And then I tell them a story about my dad. And I've got millions of them. You know, we're coming up past the hour here, and I could go on all day. But you know, this was a lot of fun for me. I really want to thank the people. I had multiple people. My buddy Shane reached out this morning, on the morning I recorded this, and he's been listening to every episode. And he said, "Hey, tell more stories about your dad. They're the best." He goes, and he never met my dad, but he just loved hearing these stories. And I love telling them. You know, I've got hundreds of them. But thanks for this. This was a treat for me, and hopefully you can use some of this to be a better man and a better father and a better husband, better person. Because that's all my dad would have wanted for you and anybody else. So thank you for spending some of your time with me. I don't take it for granted. Thanks, guys.